Hey, sleepyhead. Welcome back to another story. Get yourself settled. Find that soft spot in the pillow, the one your head already knows. Pull the blanket up a little higher if you need to. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath find its slow, easy rhythm. There is nothing to do here and nowhere else to be. Tonight we're going somewhere very far away. Not far in distance, but far away in time. More than 2,000 years into the past. We're going to a city that sat on the edge of the sea. A white city of long colonnades, palm trees, and a great lighthouse turning its flame above the harbor. A city called Alexandria. And in that city, a long time ago, a small girl was born. Her name was Cleopatra. Most of what you've heard about her isn't quite true, or it's true in the wrong way. So tonight, slowly and gently, we're going to walk through her life from the very beginning, through the lamplit rooms of her childhood, up the long, quiet Nile, through the marble hallways of her palace, all the way to the harbor where her story ends and the lighthouse still turns. You don't need to remember any of it. You don't need to follow along. You can drift in and out as you like. The story will keep going whether you're listening or not, and that's the whole point. So close your eyes now. Let the world outside grow small, and let me tell you about a queen, a sea, and a very, very long evening by the river. Chapter 1: The Lamplit Room. Come and sit with me a while. There is no need to hurry now, and nothing at all that you must do. The night outside is wide and quiet, and the lamp beside us is low and warm, and I would like, if you will let me, to tell you the long, slow story of my life. The palace, the sea, the river that carried me south through the heart of Egypt, the people I loved, the cities I have known, and you may listen for as long as you like and drift away whenever you wish, because the story will keep, and I will keep, and there is all the time in the world. Settle in. Let your breath slow. I am very old now, or so it sometimes feels, though I know, if I think carefully about it, that I was never old at all, not by the measure of years, but memory makes its own kind of age. When you have lived a great deal, and seen a great deal, and loved a great deal, you carry all of it very gently, the way a river carries the light of the sky, not holding it, not gripping it, only receiving it, and bearing it along, and letting it go. That is how I remember my life now, gently, without urgency. I am Cleopatra, 7th of my name, last queen of Egypt, first of my long Ptolemaic line to speak the language of Egypt herself, to pray in her temples as an Egyptian prays, to understand what the river means when she rises and what she means when she rests. They called me many things in my lifetime: goddess, strategist, mother, enchantress. Tonight I call myself none of those things. Tonight I am simply a woman in a quiet room with a lamp and a story, and you, and that is enough. Breathe in. Let your shoulders come down. The room I am sitting in my memory, is not a grand room. I have known grand rooms, the great columned halls of the palace in Alexandria, the gilded reception chambers where ambassadors waited with their silk-wrapped letters and their careful eyes. I have known rooms that shook with celebration, rooms loud with the voices of philosophers, rooms where history was decided over wine and lamplight by men who would later claim they had decided it alone. But the room I return to when I am very still is small. It has a low ceiling and smooth pale walls. The lamp is made of clay, ordinary clay, unadorned. The oil in it smells faintly of saffron. There is a window, and through the window comes the sound of the sea. Always the sea. Alexandria was never far from the sea. When I was a child, I did not know what a great gift that was, to grow up beside water that never stopped, that breathed in and breathed out all through the night while you slept, that carried in its salt air the suggestion of everywhere else in the world at once. I only knew that I liked it. I liked the sound it made against the stones of the harbor, a sound like a long, slow exhale, and I liked the way the light moved on it in the mornings, and I liked very much the lighthouse. But we will come to the lighthouse. We will come to everything, slowly and in order. For now, the room. For now, the lamp. I find that now, looking back, I have very little interest in the loud parts of my story. The battles, the betrayals, the final weeks, those moments have been told 1,000 times by people who were not there, who shaped the telling to their own purposes, and I find I have no great wish to compete with them. What stays with me, what I return to in these quiet hours, is the texture of ordinary things. The way the marble floor of the palace felt under my bare feet in the early morning, cool and smooth as held breath. The smell of papyrus burning, a particular soft smoke in the lamps of the library. The sound of oars. The green color of the Nile in the afternoon light, a green unlike any other green I have seen in any other place. Bread baking somewhere in the palace kitchens, and the way that smell traveled through the corridors so that you could track the hour by it. These are the things I keep. These are the things I offer you tonight, because they are the truest things I know. Not the versions of me that belong to history. Not the queen on the coins, with the careful profile and the heavy crown. Not the story that Rome told, or the story that poets told, or the story that painters later imagined. Just the girl in the marble palace, walking barefoot, listening to the sea. Come, rest. Let me begin at the beginning. I was born in the winter. That much I know. Plutarch was kind enough to work it out, and I have heard, though the hearing was long after, that he counted backwards from the end and arrived at a winter month, a cold month, the kind of month in Alexandria when the sea takes on a gray-green color and the wind comes in off the water and finds the gaps between the stones. I was born the daughter of a king, and a king's daughter in the house of Ptolemy was not a small thing to be, but neither was it entirely a safe thing to be. Our family had a habit of consuming itself, generation after generation, like a flame that burns its own wick. My father's father had been a king, his father before him, and before that, back and back, through the long line of the Ptolemies, all the way to the first of us. Ptolemy, the general, the friend of Alexander the Great, the man who looked at Egypt and decided that he had found his home. 300 years of Ptolemies before me. 300 years of Greek-speaking kings ruling over a land that spoke a different language entirely, that prayed in different temples, that understood the world through different eyes. My family had always kept themselves apart from it. We spoke Greek in the palace. We worshipped the Greek gods, or at least we performed the motions. We called ourselves Egyptians when it suited us politically, but we lived as Macedonians, as Hellenistic royalty, as something caught between two worlds without quite belonging to either. I was the one who decided, quite young, that this was a kind of poverty, but that too is for another chapter, for the language chapter, the chapter about learning, about the beautiful slow work of opening a new tongue. Tonight I only want to draw the room for you. Tonight I only want to show you the shape of the world I came into, the way you might hold a lamp close to a map, not to travel yet, only to see. The lamp beside me is burning down a little. I watch the flame, and the flame watches nothing. It simply is, that clean, simple, wavering fact of fire, the same fire that burned in the lamps of the library all those years ago. The same fire that has burned in every lamp in every room since the first person understood that darkness did not have to be permanent. There is something very restful about a lamp at this hour. Are you still with me? Good. There is no hurry. Let the room settle around you. Let the sound of my voice be something like the sound of water, something that moves without requiring your attention, something you can hear from a great comfortable distance. I am going to tell you about the lighthouse now, just briefly, just enough, because the lighthouse was the first thing I loved with my whole heart, and it seems right to offer it to you early so that it can come back to you throughout this story in softened forms, the way a recurring sound in music makes everything that follows feel familiar and safe. The great lighthouse of Alexandria stood on a small island called Pharos, just off the harbor. It was connected to the city by a long causeway, 7 stades of stone laid across the water, so that what had once been an island became almost a part of the city itself. The lighthouse was tall, very, very tall, taller than anything I had ever seen or would see for many years, 3 tiers rising into the sky, the first square, the second octagonal, the third cylindrical, and at the very top a fire that burned through the day and the night without ceasing. Bronze mirrors caught the light and sent it out across the water. Ships could see it from far, far away, from 40 miles out to sea, some said, though I was never quite sure whether to believe that. What I believed, because I had experienced it myself as a child lying awake in the palace and watching through my window, was that you could see it from the city. On clear nights it moved across the dark sea like a heartbeat, slow and steady and patient. Again and again and again. I liked to think of it as something that never had to sleep so that everyone else could. A lamp at the edge of the world, tireless and kind, asking nothing, giving light without measure. Even now, in this quiet room, I can see that soft far glow moving over the dark water, and it asks nothing of me, and I let it carry me down. That is enough for tonight's beginning. We have not yet gone far. We are still at the doorway, you and I, still in the lamplit room where the story begins, and where it will always begin again. Tomorrow night, or the night after, we will go to the palace. We will walk through the marble corridors and out into the courtyard where the white flowers grow along the walls, where the harbor breathes below, where the great library turns its face to the sea. But for now, only this, the lamp, the sound of the sea, the lighthouse, patient and turning, carrying its light across the dark water again and again without urgency, without end. Let your body rest. Let your mind go soft. There is all the time in the world, and the story will keep, and so will I, and so will you, right here in this warm and quiet room, where nothing is asked of you and nothing needs to be held. Sleep now, if you like. The rest of the story will be here whenever you return to it. The lamp is low and warm. The sea is breathing. The lighthouse turns. Chapter 2. A Palace by the Sea. Here we are again. Come and settle in beside me. There is nowhere you need to be, and nothing you need to hold in your mind. The night is deep, and the room is warm, and the lamp is burning just as it was before, low and quiet, saffron-scented. You are safe here. You are comfortable. Let your breathing slow until it finds its own natural rhythm, the way breathing always does when we stop asking it to be anything in particular. Good. Now, let me take you somewhere. I was a child in a palace by the sea. Those words feel simple when I say them now. I was a child in a palace by the sea, but when I try to hold the memory, truly hold it, the way you hold a smooth stone in your palm, feeling its weight and its temperature, it is not simple at all. It is complicated in the way that all genuine things are complicated, full of small contradictions and unexpected textures, and also full of an ordinary sweetness that I did not know enough to treasure at the time. This is perhaps the most common regret of the living. We are always in the middle of a good thing without knowing it. The palace in Alexandria, the great complex that my ancestors had built and extended and built again over 3 centuries, so that it had grown into a kind of city within the city, stood along the northeastern edge of Alexandria, looking out over the harbor toward Pharos Island and its lighthouse. From certain windows, on clear mornings, you could see all the way across the water to where the lighthouse stood on its rocky base, its first tier square and vast, its upper towers growing narrower as they rose, and at the very top the faint suggestion of the fire that never went out. I liked those windows best. In the mornings, very early, when the light was still coming in pale and low and gold across the marble floors, I would walk through the shaded courtyards in my bare feet. The marble was cool, not cold, not uncomfortable, only cool. The way a smooth stone is cool when you pick it up in shade. My footsteps made a soft sound, barely a sound at all. The palace was quiet at that hour. The servants were beginning their work, but had not yet raised their voices. The kitchens were lit, but had not yet reached their full, warm noise. The corridors were full of a particular quality of morning light that existed nowhere else, slanting in through high narrow windows and falling in long pale columns across the mosaic floors. I would stand in one of those columns of light and simply breathe. The air smelled of salt, always. The sea was never far enough to forget. And under the salt there was always the smell of papyrus, rising from the bundles of scrolls in the rooms, off the main corridor where the household accounts were kept, where my tutors left their work, where the palace's long daily business was transacted in Greek and in Egyptian, and occasionally in Latin. And under the papyrus there was something else, something harder to name, the smell of stone that has held warmth through many years, a dry mineral smell, very old, very settled, the smell of a building that knows it has been here a long time and does not expect to leave. I loved that smell. I love it still, in memory. And then the small white flowers along the garden walls. The gardens of the palace were not the largest gardens I would later see in my life. The gardens of Rome, across the river from the city, were in some ways more extravagant, more engineered toward spectacle. But they were the first gardens I knew, and I think first gardens are always the truest ones, in the way that first languages are the truest languages, worn smooth from use, perfectly fitted to the shape of the mind that learned them. The garden walls were pale stone, and along the base of the walls and up into the lower courses grew small white flowers with a sweet faint scent that I could never quite catch directly. You could only smell them from a distance, or when the wind moved the right way, and then it was unmistakable, clean and light and slightly green, the smell of something that asks very little of the world and gives back more than it receives. I spent a great deal of time in those gardens as a small child, sitting in the shade of the courtyard trees, or lying on my back looking up at the sky, or standing very still at the wall to see if the flowers would let me smell them directly. They usually would not, but I kept trying. There were slaves who tended the gardens and tutors who walked in the gardens while reciting passages I was meant to memorize, and occasionally my father walked there in the mornings with his advisors. My father moved through the palace like the sun moves through the sky, on a known path with a great deal of light, and we oriented ourselves to him without quite thinking about it. My father, Ptolemy XII, called Auletes, the flute player, by people who meant to diminish him, though I never thought the name really landed with the force his enemies intended. My father did play the flute, and he played it with genuine feeling, late at night sometimes, the sound finding its way through the palace corridors like a thin warm thread, and I thought it no more diminishing than a king who loved his wine or a king who loved his horses. We all have the thing we love that looks trivial from the outside. My father loved music. I loved languages. The lighthouse loved its fire. None of us are very different in the end. But I am getting ahead of myself. I am telling you about the child, the gardens, the mornings. In those mornings, I must have been 6 or 7, or perhaps younger, young enough that time had not yet organized itself into events, only into impressions. Nothing was asked of me yet. My serious education had not quite begun. I was a princess, the 3rd or 4th child of a complicated king, and the world had not yet settled on what it expected from me. I had siblings, though this is a word I use with some care, knowing what I know now, knowing how the word and the reality diverged as we grew older, and the throne became the thing between us. But as small children, we were simply children, loud sometimes, quiet sometimes, running through the colonnade when no one was watching, stealing dates from the kitchen, watching the ships in the harbor from the high windows. The harbor was always alive. Alexandria was a port city before it was anything else. You have to understand this about Alexandria, because otherwise the city does not make sense. It was not built like the old Egyptian cities, Thebes, Memphis, the ancient valley towns that had grown organically over centuries along the Nile, accretions of mud, brick, and stone accumulating around their temples like sediment around a stone. Alexandria was planned. Alexander himself had walked along the coast and drawn the lines of it in barley flour. The main thoroughfare here, the harbor there, the great lighthouse on the island opposite. And then the Ptolemies had carried out the plan and exceeded it again, until what had begun as a Greek general's efficient seaport had become the most magnificent city in the world. Or so we believed, in the palace. I think it was true. The harbor in the mornings was the sound of a city breathing in. Ships from everywhere, from Rome in the west, from the coast of Syria in the east, from the islands of Greece and the ports of Asia Minor, from the African coast to the south, from places whose names I was still learning. They came for grain, mostly. Egypt grew more grain than anyone else, and the whole Mediterranean world relied on it in ways that no one in the Mediterranean world quite liked to admit. They came for linen, for papyrus, for the glass that Alexandrian craftsmen made in colors I have never seen equaled. They came, though they would not always say so, for the intellectual life of the city, for the library, for the scholars, for the conversations that nowhere else in the world could offer in such density and such quality. And they brought things in return. Purple dye from Phoenicia, tin from the far islands of the west, silk from the east, that mysterious material that felt like nothing else on earth, like holding cool water in your hands, spices whose names I mouthed carefully in the kitchen doorway, learning them the way I learned everything, hungrily, with my whole attention. All of this passed through the harbor below the palace windows. I watched it for hours, sometimes in the evenings, when the light had softened to that particular Alexandrian gold that I have tried many times to describe to people who have never seen it and failed. I would find a window that faced west and simply look. The harbor would be quieting by then. The big grain ships moved slowly to their moorings, their ropes played out by men who moved with the practiced ease of people whose muscles know the work. Smaller boats darted between them, ferrying people and small cargoes. On Pharos Island, across the water, the lighthouse was beginning its night work. The fire always burned, but it was in the evenings that you truly felt it, when the sky darkened enough for the reflected light to become visible as something distinct, a presence, a reassurance. And the sea itself. The sea in the evenings would take on colors that moved through each other slowly, the way oil moves in water. First the blue of deep afternoon, then a green gold as the sun descended, then a moment of pure rose that lasted less than you wanted it to, then the long gray blue of dusk, and finally, as the stars began, a darkness that was not quite black, a darkness that had depth to it, that suggested the floor of the world a long way down. I would lean against the window frame and watch all of this, and the palace behind me would be filling with the sounds of evening, and somewhere in the corridors my father might be playing his flute, and the salt air would be coming in off the harbor, and I would feel, this is the only word for it, I would feel settled, as if I had been placed in exactly the right place. That feeling would not always be so easy to find later. Life made it harder. The crown made it harder. But I have never lost it entirely. It is the feeling I return to now, in these quiet hours of remembering. The feeling of a child at a window above a harbor, watching the sea change color in the evening light, with nothing yet asked of her and nothing yet lost. The lamp beside me has been burning steadily all this time. You have been very still. Your breathing has been very slow. Good. If you are beginning to drift, if the harbor is becoming a dream harbor, if my voice is becoming only a warmth at the edge of hearing, let it be so. The story will be here when you return. I will be here. The lamp will still be burning. The sea still breathing outside. The lighthouse still turning its patient light across the dark water. Again and again and again, there is nothing you need to hold. There is nothing you need to follow. Only rest now and let the palace settle around you. Let the salt air find its way through the window. Let the slow gold of an Alexandrian evening lie across the floor. The child is standing at her window. The sea is changing color. The lighthouse is coming on. Sleep now or rest, whichever comes, and I will be here, unhurried, when the next night brings you back to the story. The room is warm. The flame is low. The sea is still. Chapter 3. The Many Tongues of a Princess. Come and rest with me again. Let the day go. Whatever the day has held, its weights and its obligations, its noise and its brightness, let it pass out of you now, the way warmth passes out of a stone when the sun goes down, gently and completely, without resistance. The room is the same room, the lamp is the same lamp, burning low and saffron warm. Outside the sea is breathing. Breathe with it for a moment. In, out. Good. Now let me tell you about words. When I was 8 or 9 years old, my serious education began. This is not unusual for children of the palace. What was unusual, what was, I understood only slowly, practically unheard of, was the breadth of it. My father's tutors were drawn from the Museum, Alexandria's great research center, and they brought with them the habits of scholars, insatiable curiosity, a deep respect for precision, and an absolute conviction that knowledge was not a decoration but a tool. The tool I reached for first and kept returning to all my life was language. Greek I had from birth, the way all Ptolemies did. Greek was the palace language, the language of our documents and our diplomacy and our private thoughts. It was the sound of my family, the sound of my childhood, the sound of the world as I first understood it. I thought in Greek. I dreamed in Greek. Greek was the smell of papyrus and the rhythm of my tutors' voices in the cool morning rooms. But Greek was, I gradually came to understand, only one thread in the great tangled weaving of the world. My tutor for languages was a thin, patient man with a gray beard and the habit of standing very still when he was thinking, so still that sometimes, as a child, I would watch him from across the room to see if he was breathing. He always was. He was simply inhabiting thought the way a stone inhabits a riverbed, completely, without disturbance. He began with what was close. Egyptian first. Not the formal sacred script of the temple walls. That came later, in its own time, with its own teachers, but the spoken language, the demotic tongue of the valley and the delta, the language that the woman in the market spoke when she called out the prices of her spices, the language that the rivermen used when they negotiated the loading of grain barges at the docks. This language had been spoken for 3,000 years beside the Nile, and not one of my ancestors had learned it. Not one Ptolemy, in all that long line, had ever troubled themselves to understand what the majority of their own people were saying in their own voices. I found this extraordinary. I find it extraordinary still. My tutor found it, I think, quietly amusing. That a princess of the royal house should arrive at his lessons with such uncomplicated appetite, asking simply to be given the words. He gave them to me. I kept them the way you keep river water in your hands, turning them over, testing their weight. Egyptian had sounds that Greek did not have, deep sounds that came from further back in the throat, and learning to make them correctly took weeks of concentrated effort. I did not mind. I liked the effort. I liked the feeling of my mouth learning to do something it had never done before, finding new shapes, new resting points, new ways of letting breath become meaning. A word is a very small thing, and a very large one. After Egyptian came Aramaic, the trading language of the Eastern Mediterranean, the tongue of the merchants who came through Alexandria from Syria and from the territories beyond, the language, too, of the large Jewish community in Alexandria, who had lived beside the Nile for generations, and who maintained their own traditions and their own documents with a quiet, persistent dignity that I admired. Aramaic had a different music than Greek or Egyptian. It moved in a different rhythm, with a kind of urgency in its short syllables, and learning it required me to shift something in the way I listened, to hear not just the sounds but the pace, the pattern, the way one word leaned against the next. I learned it in the afternoons, in a small room off the library corridor, while the palace went about its business around me. I could hear the distant sound of the harbour through the wall, always the harbour, always the sea, and occasionally the voice of my father somewhere in the building, and occasionally the flute, briefly, like a thought that passes and is gone. These are the sounds I hear when I think of those years: language and water, learning and the sea. There were others. Hebrew, which was related to Aramaic and which I absorbed more quickly than I had expected, with a feeling of recognition that comes, I suppose, from the sounds already made familiar by months of Aramaic. The Medes' language, Parthian, which was the tongue of the great power to the east that Rome was always worrying about and never quite managed to defeat. The language of the troglodytes, those people of the south who traded in ivory and resins and the beautiful spotted skins of animals that had no equivalents in the north. Plutarch counted them up later and was impressed. I was not counting at the time. I was simply learning each new tongue as it came, following that patient thin tutor through one tongue and then the next, the way you follow a river, not because you have a destination, but because the water is moving and it seems right to move with it. What I understood, as I grew older, was that each language was not only a set of words. Each language was a way of seeing. Greek sees the world from a certain angle, with a certain quality of light, analytical, categorizing, always wanting to make the general principle from the particular fact. Egyptians sees from a different angle entirely. Older, more patient, more interested in repetition and continuity than in novelty. A language built for the long view, for the understanding that the Nile will rise again, as it always has, as it always will. Aramaic sees from a merchant's angle, a traveler's angle, pragmatic and flexible, and always aware of the other person in the transaction. To know many languages is to have many eyes. I have been grateful for that gift every day of my life. But the language I want to tell you about most, the one that matters most to this particular night and this particular quiet, is Egyptian. Not because it was the first new language or the most practically useful, but because of what it meant. There came a day, I was older by then, 11 or 12, when my tutor judged that I was ready to be taken to the temple. Not the Greek temples of Alexandria, which I had visited many times, the old Egyptian temples. We went by boat, up the river, to a place where the stone walls rose from the Nile bank, in a grandeur that has nothing in common with Greek architecture, nothing at all. Greek buildings reach upward, aspire, soar. These Egyptian temples did not reach. They pressed. They settled into the earth with a gravity that made you feel, standing beside them, that the building had always been there, had always been exactly where it stood, that the ground had organized itself around the building rather than the other way around. The walls were covered from floor to high ceiling with images. Painted and carved in relief, they told stories, stories of gods and kings, of the great cycles of the year, of the Nile rising and the Nile falling, of the dead being weighed and the good heart found light as a feather. The colors were still bright in places, protected from the sun by the angle of the walls. The deep Egyptian blue, the ochre red, the black and white and green of the great ceremonial scenes. And carved into the stone, line after careful line, hieroglyphs. I had not yet learned hieroglyphs properly, but I had learned enough to read a cartouche, to recognize the names of the gods, to follow at least the broad shape of a story. I stood in front of one great carved wall for a long time, moving my fingers slowly along the inscriptions without touching the stone, sounding out what I could. My tutor stood beside me, very still, in his characteristic way. After a while he said, quietly, in Egyptian, "You are the first of your family who could read this." I stood very still then, too. It was not a statement of pride or flattery. He was not a man who dealt in either. It was simply a fact, a true thing. And true things, plainly spoken, have a particular weight. The first Ptolemy to stand in an Egyptian temple and understand what the walls were saying. The first in 3 centuries. And I was 12 years old, in my plain dress, with my finger following the carved signs of gods I was only beginning to know. I think that was the moment I understood what I was for. There is a great deal more I could tell you about those years of learning, about mathematics, about philosophy, about the history that filled the library in 500,000 scrolls and could have consumed 100 lifetimes without exhausting itself. But tonight, I want to leave you with only the simplest of these things, the feeling of a new word arriving. There is a moment when a word you have been practicing, a foreign word, a word from a language not yet quite yours, crosses from being a sound you make into being a sound you think. It stops living on the outside of you and begins living on the inside. You no longer translate it. You simply know it, the way you know the word for water in your own first language, the way you know what the sea sounds like in the dark. That moment is very quiet. It happens while you are doing other things, while you are walking or eating, or lying very still, in the first moments before sleep. the word arrives, and it is yours. That is how languages enter you. Slowly, then all at once, then always. The lamp is burning low. You have been very still, and your breathing has been very slow, and the room has settled around both of us the way a room does at this late hour, when the walls stop listening and the ceiling stops watching, and everything simply rests. If you have drifted, if my voice has become the sound of water, if the words have stopped being words and started being only warmth, let that be so. Let it be so. The palace is quiet now. In the morning corridor, a tutor is standing very still, thinking. In the library, the papyrus scrolls rest in their hundreds of thousands, all their words held gently in the dark, and the sea outside is breathing in, out, again and again, in the old rhythm, the one that needs no words at all. Rest now, let the words go. The lighthouse is turning. The room is warm. You are safe. Chapter 4. The River and the Sacred Bull. Here we are again. Come and settle. The night is deep, and the lamp is lit, and the room is the same room, warm and quiet, carrying the faint salt smell of a city that never quite forgets the sea. Let yourself arrive here slowly, the way a boat arrives at a quiet bank, without urgency, drawn by its own gentle momentum, coming to rest by degrees. There is nothing to do. There is nowhere to be. Only this, a voice in the quiet, and a river, and a very old story about a bull. In the first year of my reign, I was 18, and I will tell you more about becoming queen in the next chapter. But for now, I want to take you to the river first, because the river comes before everything. The river is older than all of us and will be here long after. In that first year there was a ceremony. The Bucius bull had died. If you do not know what this means, do not trouble yourself. I will tell you slowly, the way the river itself tells things, which is to say over a long time, with repetition, without rush. The Bucius bull was a sacred animal, worshipped in the region of Thebes, the ancient city in the south of Egypt, the valley city, the desert city. The bull was considered a living god, an embodiment of the warrior god Montu, and in some aspects of the sun god Re, and in some aspects of the great fertility god Osiris. Each Bucius bull lived out his sacred life in the temple, received offerings, delivered oracles, so it was believed, and cured the sick who came to touch him or stand in his presence. When he died, he was mummified with great ceremony and buried in the vast bull cemetery at Armont, on the west bank of the Nile not far south of Thebes. And then a new bull was found and installed, and the cycle continued, as all Egyptian cycles continued, the river rising and falling, the sun crossing and returning, the old god dying into the young god, the grain going down into the earth and coming back as bread. The stela that records this ceremony, carved in stone, intended to be remembered, says that the queen rode the new bull up the river in the boat of Amen. That queen was me. I was 18 years old, and I was on the Nile, and the boat was moving south, and the world was very large. Let me tell you about the river. If you have never seen the Nile, you cannot quite imagine it from description, because everything about it is different from what you expect. You expect a river. What you find is something more like a country. It goes on for such a tremendous distance, 4,000 miles from its sources in the far south to its opening into the sea at Alexandria's delta, that to speak of it as a single thing, one river, seems almost too simple. It is many rivers. It is a different river at Aswan than it is at Memphis, a different river at flood than at low water, a different river in the morning than in the evening. But the river I am taking you to tonight is the summer river, the Nile of the late summer before the flood. when the water is still and green, and the air above it has a particular quality of light, a golden, suspended light, as though the afternoon is trying to last as long as possible, as though even the light is reluctant to let the day go. The barge was wide and slow. This is the thing I remember most clearly, the slowness. When you are on the river on a royal barge, you are not in a hurry. The current does most of the work, and the oarsmen do the rest, and their strokes were so long and even and measured that they imposed their own rhythm on everything, on your heartbeat, on your breathing, on the way your thoughts moved, long, even, measured, returning. The sound of oars is one of the sounds I keep. On either side of the river, the reed banks. There is a particular color of green that belongs entirely to Egyptian reed banks in the late summer. A deep, saturated, almost blue-green. A green so definite, it seems to be making a statement. The reeds stood thick and tall, and behind them the fields were already dry and gold from the summer harvest, waiting for the inundation that would come in a few weeks and cover everything with the thick brown water that brings the year's fertility. And behind the fields, in both directions, the desert. Always in Egypt, the desert. Egypt is a narrow land. Standing in the middle of it, you can sometimes see the desert on both sides. The pale, flat sand of the eastern desert to your right, the limestone cliffs and the orange sand of the western desert to your left, and between them this thin strip of green, this miracle of a river valley that had sustained human life for 4,000 years by the time I made my barge journey south. 4,000 years. My own civilization, the Ptolemaic dynasty, was barely 300 years old, and already it felt ancient. But the Egypt under the Egypt I ruled, the Egypt in the stones of the temple walls, the Egypt in the ceremonies we were reenacting on this very river, that Egypt was so old it made 300 years feel like an afternoon. I found this peaceful, not alarming. The very oldness of it was a kind of rest. We moved through small towns and villages along the bank, places where people came down to the water's edge to watch the royal barge pass. They stood in the reeds or on the mud brick steps that led down to the river. Some of them called out. I could not hear the words clearly over the sound of the oars in the river, only the feeling of the sound of many voices joined together briefly as we passed. Some of them raised their hands. I sat at the front of the barge and watched the river ahead of us. The water was green-gray in the afternoon light, and the surface was almost still, broken only by the long, slow V-shapes the oars drew, as they pulled and lifted and pulled again. Occasionally, a bird would rise from the reeds on one bank and cross low and fast to the reeds on the other, dark, quick shapes against the gold of the distant desert edge. Occasionally, a fish turned just under the surface, a flash of pale beneath the green, and was gone. The bull was housed behind me in a careful wooden structure on the barge, tended by priests. I could hear faintly the sound of chanting. The priests were singing the old words, the words from the ceremony that had been performed the same way for a very long time, and it seemed to me, sitting there on the river with the chanting behind me, and the reed banks on either side, and the slow gold afternoon light everywhere, that time was doing something unusual, that it was not moving forward exactly, that it was instead gathering, accumulating, all the past ceremonies lying down in layers under this present one, the way silt layers under silt in the deep bed of the river. I was not a young queen performing a ceremony that would be forgotten. I was a link in a chain that went back so far I could not see the beginning. That is a very particular feeling. I do not know a word for it in any of my languages. Perhaps it does not need a word. Perhaps it is the kind of thing that exists only as feeling, the way the scent of those small white flowers in the palace garden could not quite be caught directly, only received from a certain distance when the wind moved the right way. The barge reached Hermonthis, the town on the west bank south of Thebes, where the Bacchus Bull's temple and great cemetery lay, in the evening. The sun was lower by then, and the light had shifted from gold to a deep amber, and the limestone cliffs that rose behind the west bank town were turning orange, and then, as we watched, a soft dark rose. The river reflected it all. I have never seen colors move more slowly or more beautifully than the colors of an Egyptian evening on the Nile. The new bull was unloaded from the barge with great care and ceremony, and carried to his new home in the temple, and installed among prayers and offerings, and the burning of incense that rose in thin white columns in the still evening air. I performed my part of the ceremony. I stood where the queen should stand, and made the offerings the queen should make, and spoke the words in Egyptian, my Egyptian, the Egyptian I had learned in the cool morning rooms of the palace, the Egyptian that my tutor had given me word by patient word, the Egyptian that had crossed the threshold from outside to inside and become truly mine. The priests heard a Ptolemy speak to their god in the correct language for the first time in 300 years. I do not know what they felt. I know what I felt. I felt the weight of the river at my back. Coming home north was a night journey, the barge moving slowly in the dark, the stars overhead very bright, the desert silent on both sides. The reed banks made a sound in the small wind that had come up, a dry whisper, very soft, not quite a sound at all, something between a sound and a feeling, like the river thinking to itself. I lay on the deck of the barge and watched the sky. The stars in Egypt are different from the stars anywhere else. The desert and the river together create a clarity of air, no sea mist here, no northern clouds. That makes the sky seem closer, the stars more present, as though they are not distant objects, but neighbors, beings that live on the other side of a very thin ceiling. The Egyptians had names for all of them, had mapped them, tracked them, built temples aligned to their rising and setting. The star that rises over the eastern horizon in the early summer morning and precedes the annual inundation, the star the Greeks called Sirius, the dog star, was Sopdet, the goddess of the Nile flood. The sky was not decoration. The sky was part of the story, part of the great ongoing cycle that made Egypt possible, that made life possible, that had made life possible for 4,000 years. I watched the sky and I felt the river moving under me, long, even, measured, returning. Let that movement be yours now too. You have been very still. The night has deepened while I have been talking, and the room is very quiet, and the lamp is lower than it was. Let the motion of the river find you. That long, slow, even motion, the pull of the current, the absolute patience of it, carrying you gently south through the dark. There is nothing to do. There is nothing to hold. The reed banks are passing on both sides, soft in the dark. The stars are very bright. The priests are singing their old words somewhere behind you, the words that have been sung on this same river for longer than anyone living can remember, and the sound of them is not strange. It is only ancient, which is another word for familiar, which is another word for safe. The barge is moving. The river is breathing. The night is warm and deep. Sleep now. Let the current carry you. That is the inner crown. That is what it feels like to tend something. Not triumph. Triumph is too loud, too forward-facing, too much about the one who triumphs. What I felt was much quieter than triumph. It was more like the feeling at the end of a day when you have done the work that needed doing, and the lamp is lit, and the evening is settling, and you can be still. I had a son in those years, a son I named Caesarion, the little Caesar, after his father, though his Egyptian name was Ptolemy, and his divine name was associated with Horus, the young god, the falcon, the king who is always beginning. He was born in the summer in Alexandria, and for the first months of his life I carried him more than I set him down. This is perhaps not what history expects of a queen, but I have never been particularly interested in what history expects of queens. He had very dark eyes. He looked at the world with a seriousness that seemed too large for his small face, that surprised me every time. He was curious about things, about light especially, about the way it moved. I would hold him near the window and he would watch the harbor light, the reflections on the water, the slow turning brightness of the lighthouse, and I would watch him watching it, and the room would be very quiet, and the sea would be breathing outside, and it would seem to me that everything that needed to be true was true in that moment, and nothing more needed to be added. I never told anyone this. It seems too simple to tell, but the simplest things are often the truest. Being queen is not one thing. That is perhaps what I most want you to carry from this chapter, the thought I want to leave with you as you go deeper into the dark. Not the decisions or the decrees, or the careful management of grain and treasury and foreign diplomacy. Those things matter, and they are real, and I attended to them with everything I had. But being queen is also sometimes standing at a window in the early morning, with bare feet on cool marble, watching the harbor come to life. It is sitting in a courtyard in the afternoon, listening to the small white flowers breathe their faint sweet smell into the air. It is lying on a barge in the dark, with the stars very bright overhead, and the river moving underneath, and the reed banks making their soft whisper on both sides. It is holding a small child near the light and watching him watch the world. These are the parts of it that I keep closest in memory, the crown that no one sees, the weight that never leaves, and that I would not wish to leave, because it is the weight of something I was given and tried to tend well, and there is a satisfaction in that, not a triumphant satisfaction, not a loud one, only the quiet satisfaction of having been present, and careful, and genuinely in love with the thing in my care. Egypt, the black earth, the rising river, the long thin strip of green between the deserts. I loved it the way you love the thing you have chosen to be responsible for, completely, and without the option of choosing otherwise. The lamp is lower now. Your breathing has slowed. The room has settled. Whatever the day brought, its decisions, its requirements, its weights, it is distant now, behind you, behind the thick dark of the night that has gathered while I have been talking. There is nothing that needs your attention. There is only this: a quiet room, a low flame, the distant breathing of the sea, and the feeling, which I want to leave with you now, gently, as a gift, of something tended, something cared for, something that will be here in the morning, intact and green and alive, like Egypt, like you. Sleep now, the Nile is rising, the grain is in the stores, the child is asleep in the next room, the lighthouse is turning. Chapter 6. A Guest from Rome. Come in. Come and rest beside me. The night is well along now, and the room is very warm, and the lamp has been burning a long time, the way I have been burning a long time, patient and unhurried, simply here. Let your body be entirely heavy. Let your thoughts drift to the outer edges of your mind, where they become only shapes without sharp borders, only color without form. the way the edges of a dream begin before sleep has fully arrived. Breathe in, slowly, breathe out. Good. Now let me tell you about a meeting. In the autumn of the year I was 21, a Roman general arrived in Alexandria with 10 warships and 4,000 men, pursuing a political rival he believed had come to Egypt for shelter. The political rival was already dead before Caesar arrived, killed on the beach at Pelusium by my brother's advisors, who believed they were doing Rome a favor and who were spectacularly wrong about this, as they were spectacularly wrong about most things. Caesar came ashore to find a severed head presented to him as a gift, and he wept, and whether the weeping was entirely sincere or partly theatrical, it did not matter much. What mattered was that Rome had arrived in Alexandria, and Rome did not look likely to leave quickly, and I was east of Pelusium with an army I had assembled to take back my throne from the brother who had removed me from it. None of this, I should say, was simple. My brother was 10 years old when we began to reign together, and the men around him were ambitious men who had understood very quickly that a 10-year-old king was a more useful tool than a competent queen, and had managed the situation accordingly. By the time the story I am telling you reaches this autumn, my brother was 13, and the men around him were still managing the situation, and I was camped in the desert east of Alexandria with an army of mercenaries I had somehow assembled and nowhere particular to be. Then, word reached me that Caesar was in the palace. I want to tell you about this meeting not as a grand story, but as a quiet one, because it was, in the end, a quiet thing. 2 people in a room, a lamp, a conversation that lasted all night and changed the shape of the world, but changed it the way rivers change landscapes, not suddenly, not violently, only through the persistent, slow work of presence and weight. The stories that came later made a romance of it, and perhaps they were not entirely wrong. But I think what is truer and more interesting is that it was a meeting of 2 people who recognized in each other something unusual, a quality of attention, a quality of will, a readiness to act that most people feel as threat and a few people feel as pleasure. Caesar, at that point, was 52 years old. I was 21. He was by all accounts not conventionally handsome. Thinning hair, which bothered him considerably more than it should have bothered a man of his accomplishments, a face that was regular and pleasant rather than striking, a frame that had once been soldier lean and was now beginning the inevitable negotiation with middle age. But none of that is what you noticed. What you noticed was the quality of his listening. He listened the way very few people listen, with his whole attention, tracking everything, missing nothing, filing things away in some internal order that was entirely his own. It was a form of intelligence that expressed itself as stillness, and I recognized it immediately because it was something like my tutor, standing in the corner, very still, thinking. I had always responded well to that quality of attention. The business of how I entered the palace, carried in a bedroll by a Sicilian merchant named Apollodorus, according to the story, or in a bundle of linen, or perhaps simply by a small boat at night while the harbor watch looked the other way, I leave to your imagination. Plutarch enjoyed telling this part of the story, and I will not spoil his enjoyment. What I will tell you is that I arrived in the palace in the dark, and that Caesar was sitting in a lamplit room very much like this one, and that we looked at each other. I will not tell you what we said, because it was private, and because the specifics matter less than the shape of it. The shape of it was 2 people in a room, each of whom needed something, each of whom had something to offer, each of whom was genuinely curious about the other. That is rarer than it sounds. Most meetings are performances. One person performing competence, the other performing authority. The transaction executing itself on the surface, while both parties keep their actual selves safely elsewhere. This was not that kind of meeting. He asked me about Egypt, not the political situation, not first, not immediately. He asked me about Egypt. He had read, he said, everything available about Egypt in the Roman libraries, and he had found it insufficient. He wanted to know what it felt like, from the inside, to rule a country that was 4,000 years old. He wanted to know about the river. He wanted to know about the priesthood and the temples and the old ceremonies. He had visited the tomb of Alexander that morning and had been moved by it in ways he found slightly embarrassing, he admitted. Moved by the evidence of greatness in an era he had not been born into. I told him about the Nile. I told him about standing on the barge in the dark with the stars overhead. I told him about the smell of the temples, that particular smell of incense and old stone, and something else, something I could not name, that I had come to associate with the feeling of time existing in layers. He listened with that quality of attention. I think that was the beginning of it, whatever it was. Not beauty, not politics, not the well-known susceptibility of the great man to the young woman, or of the young woman to the great man, but something simpler and more specific. Two people who were genuinely interested in the same things, who had both spent their lives in the company of ideas, and had not found very many other people to talk to. Outside the room, the city was asleep. Alexandria, in the deep middle of the night, is one of the world's quieter sounds. Quieter than you would expect from a city of 500,000 souls, because the sea takes the sound and disperses it, and the stone of the buildings absorbs what the sea misses, and what remains is a kind of sustained hush, punctuated every now and then by a distant voice, or the bark of a dog, or the creak of a boat against its mooring in the harbour. And underneath all of it, always, the breathing of the sea. We talked until the sky began to lighten in the east. I remember the moment when the quality of the darkness in the window changed from full black to the very faintest suggestion of blue, a blue so pale and tentative it was almost not a color at all, more like the memory of a color, the idea of blue, the whisper of a day that had not yet decided to begin. We had been talking for hours. He asked if I was tired. I said I was not. He said he was not either. He said this in a tone that suggested he found this unremarkable, that he was accustomed to not being tired when he was engaged with something important. I thought, yes, that is what it is to be engaged with something important. I will not tell you everything about the years that followed, the wars that happened around us, the people who died, the political negotiations that happened in half sentences between larger conversations. That is not the story for this hour, this particular quiet. What I want to leave you with from this chapter is only this. There was a night in Alexandria, and a room with a lamp, and a conversation that lasted until dawn, and the quality of that conversation, the way it moved back and forth between large things and small things, between history and philosophy, and the specific color of the Nile in the afternoon, and the way the lighthouse could be seen from certain palace windows, and what the stars look like from the deck of a river barge at midnight. The quality of that conversation was unlike anything I had experienced before. And I believe this, in memory, that what made it possible was not the circumstances, not the politics, not even the attraction, but simply the willingness to be fully present, to give the other person your whole attention, to listen the way my tutor listened, very still, missing nothing. That is a gift when it is given genuinely. I have had it given to me a handful of times in my life. and I have tried always to give it back. The lamp has been burning a long time now. You are deep in the night, I think. Your breathing is slower than it was when I began. The room has gathered itself around you, the way rooms do at this hour, warm and still, the ceiling no longer watching, the walls simply holding, the darkness outside very complete. Let the conversation go quiet now. The palace is sleeping. The city is sleeping. The sea is doing what the sea always does, breathing in and breathing out, slowly, without any particular urgency, simply present, simply here. And the lighthouse is turning, slow and patient, again and again and again. There is nothing that needs to be decided. There is nothing that needs to be done. Only this warmth and this quiet and the long, slow breathing of a city by the sea. Sleep now. Let the dawn come when it comes. You will be here. I will be here. The story will keep. Chapter 7. The city on the Tiber settle in again. Let your weight come fully into the surface beneath you, every part of you. Nothing held in reserve, nothing braced, nothing guarded. You are safe. The room is warm, the lamp is burning. Let yourself be as heavy as the night. Breathe. Tonight I want to take you somewhere far from Alexandria, across the sea, to a city that was in many ways the most surprising place I ever lived. I went to Rome in the year that my son was born, or perhaps a little after. The exact timing has blurred slightly in the long passage of memory. Caesar arranged it, or perhaps I arranged it, and Caesar agreed, or perhaps it was one of those arrangements that neither party quite initiates, and both eventually accept as inevitable. I came with my household, with my people, with everything necessary to maintain the appearance and the reality of a queen in residence, and we were settled in Caesar's house across the Tiber, the Horti Caesaris, the gardens of Caesar, a large and pleasant estate on the west bank, visible from the hills of the city across the river. Rome. I had read about Rome for years. I had read the histories and the accounts of travelers and the letters of diplomats. I believed I knew what it would be. I was wrong in almost every particular. What I had not understood, what no account I had read quite prepared me for, was the noise. Alexandria was not a quiet city. 500,000 people, a busy harbor, a marketplace that never quite stopped. But Alexandria was built for its climate, its architecture allowing the sea breeze to pass through, its wide colonnaded streets designed to carry both people and air, and the sea itself absorbing a great deal of the sound and scattering it harmlessly across the harbor. Rome was built for none of these things. It had grown without much planning, though Julius Caesar was in the process of trying to rectify this, ordering streets paved, and regulations imposed, and new building schemes developed. And what it had produced was a city of extraordinary density, apartment buildings, many stories tall, packed together along narrow alleys, so that sound had nowhere to go. It simply accumulated. At night, when the heavy wagons were allowed into the city to make their deliveries, Caesar had banned wheeled traffic from the streets during the day, so all the city's goods arrived in the hours of darkness. The din was extraordinary. Creaking wheels, shouting carters, iron-shod hooves on stone, the argument between two drivers trying to pass through the same narrow alley at the same time. I would lie awake in the Horti Caesaris listening to it across the river and think, this is what power sounds like, when it has not yet learned to be quiet. But in the gardens, it was different. The gardens were spacious and carefully tended, with paths between the plantings and pools that held the afternoon light in their still surfaces. There were plane trees, very large, with that beautiful dappled bark that always looked to me like something someone had painted on the trunks, patches of pale green and white and ochre, as though the tree could not decide what color to be, and had settled on all of them at once. And there were roses. I had roses in Alexandria, of course, and flowers of all kinds, but the roses of the Horti Caesaris were a particular variety that I had not seen before, large-headed, very red, with a scent so dense it was almost a physical thing, something you walked through rather than smelled, a warmth you entered and stood in for a moment before coming out the other side. I walked in those gardens every morning when the weather allowed, with my son when he was old enough to walk, later alone when the political situation required me to be somewhat more discreet about being seen. Rome had views about many things, and one of the things Rome had the strongest views about was foreign queens living in the city. I was not technically in the city. The Tiber was between me and the Pomerium, the sacred boundary of Rome itself, but I was close enough for Roman sensibilities to be exercised. I tried not to mind this. I observed Rome from a comfortable distance, and I found it interesting. Rome in those years was a city becoming something else. You could feel the transition in the air the way you can feel weather changing. Not a sudden shift, but a gradual, accumulating pressure. Everything moving slowly in the same direction, without quite arriving yet. The Republic was ending. The Empire was coming. Julius Caesar was at the center of this transformation, pulling and being pulled, and there was an intensity around him in those years that was both exhilarating and exhausting. The feeling of being close to a fire that gives warmth and might at any moment give something else. I watched Rome from my gardens. I listened to what the visitors brought when they crossed the river, their gossip and their news, their assessments and their concerns, their Roman certainties and their Roman anxieties. I learned more Latin in those months than I had learned in all my years of formal study, because spoken Latin in the mouth of a Roman on an ordinary day is a completely different creature from the formal Latin of diplomatic correspondence. And I thought, not without admiration, about what Rome had built: the roads, the aqueducts, the legal system that operated in 100 different languages across 1,000 different landscapes, providing something like the same structures for a farmer in Gaul and a merchant in Syria. Rome had a talent for organization that Egypt, with all her ancient wisdom, had never quite developed in the same way. Egypt organized time, the calendar, the festival, the eternal return of the flood. Rome organized space, the province, the road, the legionary camp. Two different kinds of intelligence. I was interested in both. I was in Rome for almost 2 years. 2 years of the gardens and the roses and the noise at night across the river and the plane trees with their indecisive bark. 2 years of watching a city become an empire, from a careful distance, from the West Bank, from the position of a guest who is interested without being involved. What did I feel in those years? I think I felt a particular quality of patience that I had not had before, a patience born of distance, of being in a place where I could observe without the weight of responsibility falling on every moment. In Egypt, I was always the queen, and the queen is always at the center of things, always the point from which decisions radiate outward. In Rome, I was still technically a queen, but I was a foreign queen in a foreign city, and the decisions were being made across the river, and I watched them being made the way you watch a river from a high bank, with interest, with a kind of admiring attention, without being in the current. It was a rest of a kind. I did not know, at the time, that it was also the last extended rest I would have for many years. The morning I remember most clearly from those 2 years is a very simple one. Early, before the household was fully awake, I walked to the edge of the garden nearest the river and stood there for a while looking east toward the city. The sun was not yet fully up, and the light was that pale, tentative quality I had learned to love in Alexandria, the blue-white of a sky not quite committed to morning. And Rome across the river was only a suggestion in the haze, its hills dark, its thousands of buildings not yet visible, only the shape of it, the mass of it, the sense of something very large holding its breath. I stood there and thought, I am a long way from home. And then, this is home now for a while. This garden, this early light, this particular river. And then, quietly, without sorrow, every place I have been has been home for a while. The palace in Alexandria, the barge on the Nile, the temple in Hermonthis, this garden across the Tiber. They are all still here. They all still exist somewhere, in the only place that matters, in what I carry. The night is very deep now. The room is very quiet. The lamp is lower still, burning down slowly toward its rest. If you have been traveling with me across the sea to Rome, if you have been walking in the gardens with the plane trees and the red roses, if you have stood with me on the riverbank in the early morning, watching the city hold its breath, let yourself stay there a moment longer. Let the garden settle around you. Let the roses breathe their warm, dense scent. Let the river pass. You are a long way from your usual place, or you are exactly where you need to be. And in the night, those are often the same thing. Sleep now. The roses are still blooming. The river is still passing. The city is still breathing across the water. Patient and enormous, not yet what it is becoming, only what it is. Let it be. Let everything be. Chapter 8. Caesarion and the Quiet Years. Come back. Let yourself arrive here again, in the warm room, with the low lamp, with the night arranged around you like a held breath. You are safe. You are entirely comfortable. There is nothing pressing at the edges of this hour, nothing waiting, only rest, only this voice, and the story, and the slow time of late night in which we find ourselves. Let your breathing find its pace. Let your body be easy. After I came home from Rome, there were quiet years. I want to dwell here. I want to dwell in the quiet, because it is easy in the telling of any life to pass quickly through the peaceful parts, to say, and then there were good years, and move on to the next dramatic event. And I have always found this a kind of injustice. The dramatic events make the story. The quiet years make the person. And the quiet years I spent in Alexandria, with my son, governing Egypt through a period of relative stability, were the years that gave me whatever I had left to give in the harder years that followed. The quiet years deserve their chapter. Caesarion was 3 years old when I returned to Alexandria, and then 4, and then 5. He was a serious child. I said this before, and I say it again because it seems important. He had that quality of intense focus that some children have, the capacity to be utterly absorbed by whatever is in front of them. A beetle crossing a stone, a finger of light moving across the floor, the rigging of a ship in the harbor. He would stand still for longer than any adult expected a child to stand still, simply watching, simply taking in. I recognized this quality. I had had it myself. He was learning languages as I had learned languages, from tutors I had chosen with care, and he had a similar gift for them, not just the sounds, but the music, the sense of where a language lives in the mouth and the body, Greek and Egyptian and the beginnings of Latin. He would sit in the garden with his tutors in the mornings and recite, his small voice careful with the new sounds, and I would hear him from my workroom and feel something I can only describe as the particular satisfaction of a good thing continuing. He was also, very noticeably, my father's grandson. He played the flute, not well at 5 years old, but with the same quality of absorption, the same willingness to repeat a phrase until it came right, that I remembered in my father's playing. I found this both wonderful and painful, the way all inheritances are painful, because inheritance is presence, and the presence of a thing that has been lost is itself a kind of loss. But I am getting too philosophical for this late hour. Let me just say, my son played the flute in the evenings, and the sound found its way through the palace corridors the same way my father's had, and the world went on. The governing of Egypt in those years was the closest I came to feeling that I had found the work I was made for. Not the crises, though I handled those. Not the diplomacy, though there was a great deal of it, the constant, careful correspondence with Rome, the management of client relationships, the endless and necessary performance of stability in a world that was not stable. Those things I did, and I did them well enough. But what I loved was the ordinary governing, the decisions about irrigation and grain distribution, and temple maintenance and road repair, the cases that came to me from the various nomes, disputes about land boundaries, questions of inheritance, complaints about local officials overstepping their authority. I had a reputation in those years for listening to cases personally, which was unusual for a Ptolemaic ruler, who typically delegated judicial functions several levels down. I listened because I found it illuminating, because the complaints that came to me from a village in the Fayum were a form of education that no book or tutor could provide, the education of understanding what the country was actually experiencing, as opposed to what the documents said it was experiencing. Egypt is very long and very thin. You can stand in Alexandria and feel certain that you understand it, and then you can travel 400 miles south to Thebes and discover that you understand it differently there. And then you can go further south still, to Aswan, to the first cataract where the river narrows and the red granite rocks rise from the water, and discover that you understand something else entirely. The land changes, the light changes, the people change in ways that are subtle and important. The northern delta farmers are a different kind of person from the Nile Valley farmers of the south, who are a different kind of person from the desert edge communities to the east and west. I tried to understand all of them. I am not sure I succeeded, but the trying mattered. In the evenings, in those quiet years, I had a practice that I will tell you about because it seems, in retrospect, to have been very important for keeping me the right kind of still. After the day's work was done, the audiences and the correspondence, and the decisions and the carefully worded letters to Rome, I would go to the library, not to study, not to read with any particular purpose, only to sit among the scrolls in the quiet and let the accumulated presence of all those words settle around me. The great library of Alexandria, 500,000 scrolls or more, depending on who was counting, was not in its final glory in those years. It had suffered during the wars that preceded my reign, when fire had spread from the harbour and damaged parts of the collection. My predecessors had been working to restore it. I continued that work. But restoration is slow, and in those evenings the library was half its ideal self, half empty shelves where the lost scrolls should have been, half full of what had been saved and what was being slowly rebuilt. I liked it better that way. Perfection is somehow less comfortable than the thing in the process of becoming itself. I would sit in the evening light, with the shelves of scrolls around me and the gaps in the shelves where the missing ones had been, and I would be very still, and think of nothing in particular, and let the quiet of all those written words settle into me like the deep warmth of the black earth after the flood has passed. This is what peace feels like, I thought in those evenings. This is what I am working to protect. Not the palace, not the throne, not even the dynasty. These ordinary evenings. The library and its quiet, the scrolls in their places, the evening light on the floor. My son somewhere in the palace, playing the flute. The lamp is very low. You are very far into the night now, and I think you are close to sleep. Really close. The kind of close where the edges of what I am saying are becoming softer, less distinct. The words arriving like warmth rather than meaning. Let that happen. Let the library settle around you. Let the scrolls hold the quiet. Let the evening light stay on the floor just a little longer. My son is playing the flute somewhere. The sound is thin and warm and slightly imperfect, the way all real things are imperfect, and all the more themselves for it. The sea is breathing. The lighthouse is turning. The black earth is holding. Everything it has been given. Sleep now. The quiet years are here. Rest in them. Chapter 9. Antony and the Golden Barge. Here we are again. Come and be still. The lamp is burning and the room is warm and the night is deep around us, holding everything gently in its enormous quiet hands. Let yourself sink a little deeper into the surface beneath you. Let your shoulders release. Let your jaw soften. Breathe. I want to tell you about the barge. There are moments in a life that are simply beautiful, not meaningful exactly, or not only meaningful, but beautiful in themselves. The way a piece of music is beautiful. The way the sky above the lighthouse is beautiful on a clear night, with the stars very close. I have tried, as I have gotten older, to hold these moments alongside the significant ones, because I think we are in danger, always, of forgetting that beauty is itself a form of significance. That a gilded barge on a blue river, with purple sails and silver oars, on a clear afternoon in late summer, that this too is something that happened, that this too belongs to the record. So let me tell you about the afternoon I arrived at Tarsus. Tarsus is a city in what the Romans call Cilicia, the southern coast of what is now largely Roman territory, a prosperous region where the land comes down to the sea in a series of rocky headlands and small flat-bottomed harbors. The river Cydnus runs through Tarsus and out into the sea, and on that particular afternoon in late summer, the river was calm and the sky was an exceptional blue, the deep, saturated blue of a Mediterranean afternoon in August, the blue that seems to have weight to it, that seems not to be behind things, but in front of them. Mark Antony was in Tarsus. He had summoned me. This is, let us be honest, the more accurate description than the one that later romanticized it. He had summoned me in the manner of a Roman general who expects compliance, for a meeting intended to clarify the political relationship between Rome's eastern interests and the Kingdom of Egypt. I chose to arrive by river. This was, I will confess to you in the intimacy of this late hour, deliberate. Deliberateness and Cleopatra have always been synonymous, whatever the stories say. The barge had been prepared over several weeks. The hull was gilded, not painted gold, genuinely gilded, the real gold leaf applied by craftsmen I had brought from Alexandria, men who understood how to make a surface catch and hold and disperse the light in ways that made it visible from a very great distance on open water. The sails were purple, the deep, costly purple made from the murex shellfish of the Phoenician coast, the color that said, here is someone for whom expense is not a consideration. The oars were silver-plated, and when they moved in the water, they caught the sun and scattered it in small, bright explosions across the river surface. There was music. I had brought musicians, lyres, double flutes, the percussion instruments that give Egyptian music its particular quality of moving like water, in waves rather than beats. They played from the stern of the barge, and because the afternoon was still and the river carried sound beautifully, the music reached the harbor and the docks, and the crowds that had gathered there long before the barge itself came into view. And there was perfume. This is perhaps the detail that I enjoy most in the telling, because it is so completely impractical and so completely effective. The sails, before they were raised, had been soaked in a distilled flower essence. Roses, I think, and something else, something heavier, some resin from the eastern territories, so that as the wind filled them and the barge moved through the air that moved with it was scented. The crowd on the bank smelled the barge before they saw it. I was told afterward, by various reliable sources, that the harbor and the docks emptied as the people of Tarsus came down to the water's edge to see what was coming. I am also told, and this I find privately amusing, that Antony was left sitting alone in the market square waiting for me, because everyone who had been sitting with him had gone to sea. I lay on the deck of the barge, not reclining in the formal sense that the stories tell it, not dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, with attendants playing cupids and waiting women fanning the air around me. That is the version that Plutarch enjoyed, and I do not entirely blame him for the embellishment. He was a good storyteller, and good storytellers find the image that the story requires and honor it. But the reality was somewhat simpler, and I think no less effective. I was dressed well. I was dressed as a queen. The dress was linen, the finest Egyptian linen, bleached and worked until it was almost weightless, and over it I wore the jewelry that had been in the Ptolemaic treasury for generations, pieces made by craftsmen whose names are lost, whose hands understood gold and lapis and carnelian in ways that only come from long practice and genuine love of the materials. I lay on the deck, and I let the barge arrive. The afternoon light was that specific gold. I have mentioned Alexandrian evening gold before, that particular quality of the Egyptian light. But this Cilician afternoon light had something similar, filtered through the haze above the river, falling on everything with a quality of attention, as though the light were looking at the scene with interest. The music played. The purple sails moved. The silver oars scattered the light. The scented air moved ahead of us. Antony. Let me tell you about Antony, because he deserves to be told carefully, not in the way that the later stories told him, not as the weak man seduced by the Eastern queen, not as the ruined general who loved too much, not as Caesar's inferior successor. Those versions contain some truth, as all caricatures do, but they are not the whole. Antony was the most physical person I had ever known. Not merely strong, though he was certainly strong, with the physique of a man who had spent most of his adult life as a soldier and who used his body as a natural form of communication. Expansive gestures, easy comfort in space, the kind of presence that fills a room not by claiming it, but by simply being large in it in an uncomplicated way. He was warm, genuinely warm, in a way that was not calculation. He liked people. He liked pleasure. He liked wine. And he liked company. And he liked, this was the part that surprised me most, he liked to laugh. I had not expected to laugh with him. I had expected negotiations. We negotiated, certainly. We spent weeks negotiating, our respective positions carefully articulated, our respective needs examined from every angle. I needed Rome to support Egypt's continued independence. He needed Egypt's resources to fund his eastern campaigns. These were not small needs. We addressed them seriously, and we reached agreements that served us both. But in between, we laughed. He told stories about his campaigns, his military disasters with the same good-humored abandon as his victories, which I found unexpectedly disarming. Most powerful men cannot tell stories about their failures. Antony could. He understood himself well enough to know that the disasters were as much a part of the record as the victories, and that a man who could not laugh at his own failures was a man who had confused himself with an idea of himself rather than the reality. I found this extremely interesting. I have always been drawn to people who know the difference. The barge on the Cydnus, the golden hull, the purple sails, the music, the scent on the afternoon air. This is the image that has stayed, 2,000 years later, the image that became the symbol of something. Of what exactly? Of luxury, perhaps? Of extravagance? Of a queen making her entrance on her own terms. But what I remember, lying on the deck in the afternoon light, the music behind me, the bank coming into view with all those people lining it, the city of Tarsus waiting, what I remember is something much quieter. I remember the light on the water, the small bright explosions the silver oars made, the way the music traveled downstream ahead of us, arriving before us, announcing us to a city that did not yet know what was coming. And I remember thinking, whatever comes next, this afternoon is beautiful. This afternoon will have been. Nothing can take it back. The lamp has been burning. The night is very deep and very quiet. Let the river go still around you. Let the music fade, very slowly, the way music fades, not cutting off, only becoming smaller, becoming the suggestion of music, becoming warmth. The golden hull reflects the afternoon light. The purple sails are full. The scent of roses moves in the air. Sleep now. Let the river carry you. Let the afternoon hold you in its particular gold. You will remember it in the morning, or you will not, and either way the river will have carried you gently all through the night. Chapter 10. Winters in Alexandria. Come and rest. The night is deep, and the room is warm, and the lamp is the lowest it has been, burning with a flame that is gentle and steady, patient as a lighthouse fire, asking nothing, giving light. Let your body settle. Let your thoughts lose their edges. After Tarsus, there were winters in Alexandria. Not metaphorical winters, the actual winters, the cool months when the sea changed color from summer blue to a deeper, greener gray, and the light came through the palace windows at a lower angle, falling in longer stripes across the floors, and the gardens had a different smell. Earth, rather than blossom, the smell of things resting and gathering. Antony came to Alexandria. He came as a guest, as a man who had been traveling a long time and wanted to rest for a while in a place that was beautiful and peaceful and well supplied. And he came as a friend, which was also accurate. And he came for the reasons that powerful people always come to other people's capitals, to see, to learn, to understand what they are dealing with, to test the reality of a thing against the idea of it. What he found was Alexandria. I have described Alexandria in pieces throughout this story. The harbor, the lighthouse, the library, the marble palace with its cool floors and salt air. Let me now try to give you the whole, as it looked and felt in those winter evenings when the city was at its most itself, when the tourists had gone and the summer merchants had moved on, and what remained was the city's permanent soul. Alexandria in winter had a quality of inhabited intelligence that I have found nowhere else. The scholars were in the library, as they always were. The philosophers were arguing in the gymnasium, as they always were. Long, heated, productive arguments about the nature of the good, the properties of matter, the movement of the celestial bodies, the right way to govern a city, the right way to govern a life. The doctors were in the hospital attached to the Serapeum, treating their patients with the combination of practical observation and elaborate ritual that was, I thought, probably more effective than either alone. The glassmakers were in their workshops, the papyrus workers at their preparation tables, the mathematicians at their figures, the astronomers at their instruments. All of this was always happening. What made winter different was the quality of the conversation, which deepened when the pace of ordinary life slowed. Summer is an extrovert season. Winter is the season when you are willing to stay in the same place for a long time and think about something carefully. I loved winter in Alexandria. Antony in Alexandria was a different creature from Antony in the military field. The military Antony the Ye had understood from the beginning, the directness of it, the clarity, the way a soldier's world organizes itself around the essential questions of position and supply and morale. I understood those things in my own domain, in the parallel language of a queen's concerns. We had always been able to speak to each other in that register, but the Antony who came to the library with me, who sat in the evening with a cup of wine and listened to scholars argue, who walked in the winter gardens when the roses had retreated and the plane trees were bare and the sky was a clear cold gray, that Antony was more complicated than the public record would later allow. He was curious. He had not been given the education I had been given, the systematic immersion in language and philosophy and history that had shaped my thinking from early childhood. But he was curious in the natural the way animals are curious, following interest wherever it led without self-consciousness. He asked questions of everyone. The scholars in the library found him initially alarming, a Roman general in their reading rooms, asking blunt questions about the nature of infinity, and then found him interesting because his questions, however bluntly phrased, were genuine questions, not performances of curiosity, but the real thing. I liked watching him become interested in things. I liked that he was willing to be a student. The banquets. There were banquets? Yes. There were always banquets in Alexandria, which was a city that treated the pleasure of eating and drinking together as a serious cultural form rather than a simple indulgence. We ate well, and we drank well, and we talked late into the night, and we laughed. This is the part that the later accounts often forget. So focused are they on the grandeur and the politics and the eventual tragedy. We laughed a great deal. Antony made a game of it. He would arrive at the table having prepared, though he pretended not to have prepared, some challenge or puzzle or provocation designed to get the company arguing about something interesting. He had a natural gift for this, for finding the question that was simple on its surface and more complicated underneath, and releasing it into a group of people the way you release a bird into a room. Then he would sit back and watch what happened, with that warm, easy smile. The birds he released in Alexandria flew further than anywhere else. There were 3 of us in those years who spent the most time together, Antony and myself, and a small private circle of friends who called themselves the Inimitable Livers. This was a joke, and it was not a joke. The name referred in its surface irony to the extraordinary quality of the life we were living, the extraordinary city, the extraordinary company, the food and wine and conversation. But underneath the irony was something more serious, a genuine recognition that this was not ordinary life, and that we were not going to pretend it was. We were living at the apex of the ancient world, at the intersection of its 2 greatest civilizations, in the most beautiful city in the world, at a moment of genuine historical consequence, and we knew it. Not in a grandiose way. That would have made the knowing oppressive. But in a quiet way, the way you know when you are in a particular quality of light, a particular quality of afternoon, that it is worth paying attention. The inimitable livers paid attention. We paid attention to the wine and the food, yes, but also to the scholars and their arguments, also to the architecture of the city and the way the harbor light changed through the day, also to each other, to the way a person is in different hours and different seasons, the way a relationship deepens not through declaration but through simple accumulated presence. I was present in those years, fully present. Outside Alexandria, the world was preparing its difficulties. Octavian was in Rome, becoming what he would become. Antony's wife was in Rome. The armies were in various places. The debts were accumulating, as they always were. The future was organized against us in ways that we could see, at least in outline, without being able to quite prevent. But winter in Alexandria had a quality of enclosure, of warmth held in by stone walls and the sound of the sea, that made the future feel like something on the other side of a very thick wall, audible occasionally, but not yet present, not yet here. Let it stay there for this chapter. Let it stay on the other side of the wall. The fire in the lamp is very low. The room is very quiet. The sea outside is breathing in and out, slowly, steadily, the way it has breathed for as long as anyone can remember, and will breathe for as long as anyone will live to hear it. Think of the winter gardens, the bare plane trees with their dappled bark, the gray winter sky, the roses gone to their roots, resting in the dark earth, keeping their color against the spring. Think of the fire in the banqueting room and the voices and the laughter. Think of the lighthouse turning, far out on the island, patient and bright. It is very late. Let the walls hold the warmth. Let the winter quiet come in. Let yourself go. Chapter 11. The Light on the Water. Changes. Come and be still. The night is very far along now, and the lamp has burned low, and the room holds a quietness that is particular to this late hour. Not the quiet of a world waiting, but the quiet of a world resting, completely and without effort, the way everything rests between one breath and the next. Let that quiet find you. Breathe in. Breathe out. There is a quality of light that belongs to late afternoon in Alexandria, late autumn specifically, when the year has turned and the days are shorter, when the sun drops toward the horizon and the angle of the light changes, and everything that it touches changes with it. The harbor goes from blue to gold. The lighthouse stone, always white in the full sun, takes on a warmth it does not have at other hours, a rose gold, the color of very old marble. The sea beyond the harbor mouth darkens to a green so deep it is almost black at the edges, and at the center it holds the last of the direct sunlight, a broad shining path from the horizon to the shore. I have watched this light hundreds of times, but there came a season when I noticed it differently. The world beyond Alexandria was changing in ways that could not be ignored any longer. I want to tell you about this gently, because the telling matters. The facts of it are not soothing facts, and I do not want to wake you with sharp edges. But this is a true life, and a true life contains the turning points alongside the peaceful stretches, and to pretend otherwise would be a kind of dishonesty that I do not think serves you. What I want to give you is not the facts, but the feeling of this time as I experienced it, which was not, surprisingly, a feeling of fear or anguish. It was something much quieter than that. It was the feeling of a person who has lived long enough to understand that the world is always changing, that things that appear permanent are only slow, that the great institutions and arrangements of a civilization are as subject to the work of time as the green of the reeds or the height of the flood. Octavian was winning his war. Antony and I knew it. We had known it for some time. We discussed it in the evenings, carefully and without panic, the way experienced people discuss difficult weather, not pretending it is something else, but also not giving it more weight than it deserves. Understanding that the situation is what it is, and that the quality of how you respond to it matters more than the outcome alone. I was a queen. I had always known, in some deep part of myself, that the reign would end, as all reigns end. This is not defeatism. It is simply the understanding that runs underneath everything in Egypt, the understanding carved into every temple wall. The sun sets. The sun also rises. The flood recedes. The flood returns. What comes after this is not absence, only transformation. The children were growing. Caesarion was 13, 14, 15 in those years, growing into a seriousness that I recognized and loved, a young man who would have been a good king, who had the temperament for it, the patience and the curiosity, and the genuine care for the people under his charge that I had tried to model for him from the beginning. He was playing the flute still, better now, the imperfect but real quality of his playing having become a true quality of its own. He played in the evenings, and the sound still traveled through the palace corridors, and it was still the same thin, warm thread it had always been, and I was grateful for it every time I heard it. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, were younger and noisier, and made the palace feel inhabited in a different way, the way only children who run in corridors and laugh too loud can make a building feel inhabited. They were their father's children as well as mine, and in their easy loudness and their readiness for pleasure I could see him. I was grateful for this too. The light on the water changes. This is what I want to give you for this chapter, for this particular late autumn evening of the story. Not the battles, not the politics, not the careful accounting of what was lost and won. Only this, the quality of attention that comes when you understand that something is passing. I watched the harbor from the high windows of the palace in the evenings of those years, and I watched with a quality of attention that I had not quite had before. Not anxious, not desperate, not trying to hold the light still, only present to it, only fully there in the way that knowing a thing is passing makes you more fully present to it. The sea was gold, then rose, then the deep green at the center where the last light held, then gray, deepening, the lighthouse coming on at the edge of the island, the first stars appearing in the east. And I would stand there for a long time, not doing anything, not deciding anything, only watching, only here. If you are still awake, and perhaps you are, hovering in that borderland between hearing and not hearing, between the story and the dream, let me tell you this. The thing that passes is not gone. It is only gone from one kind of existence into another. The afternoon is gone when the evening comes, but the afternoon was real, and it is still real in the only way that finally matters, which is that it happened. The light on the water of the harbor on a late autumn afternoon in Alexandria was real. The warmth of the palace stone was real. The sound of the flute in the corridor was real. These things cannot be taken back. They are kept. Let the evening settle. Let the light go slowly from the water. Let the lighthouse come on. The stars are out. The sea is breathing. Everything that was beautiful was real. Sleep now. Chapter 12. What the Queen Remembered. Come back one more time. Let the room be a room you know now. The same low lamp, the same warm air, the same sound of the sea outside, faint and steady and endlessly patient. You have been here many nights now. This room is familiar. This voice is familiar. Let the familiarity itself be a comfort, the way a well-worn thing is comfortable, the way the smell of a place you love is comfortable, not exciting, only right. Breathe. I have been thinking in these late hours about what I keep, not what history kept, not what the stories kept, not what the coins and the temples and the carved stone walls preserved. Those things I cannot entirely control. What I mean is what I keep, what stays with me in the deepest and quietest hours when everything else has settled and there is only the lamp and the room and the long quiet. Let me show you what is here. The lighthouse. Always, always the lighthouse. Standing on its island in the harbour of Alexandria, turning its light across the dark water. The 3 tiers of it, square, then octagonal, then cylindrical, rising to the fire at the top, the fire that never went out, the fire that was older than my reign, and outlasted it and kept burning for centuries after, until the earthquakes finally brought it down. The light sweeping across the sea again and again, patient and kind, asking nothing of the ships that used it to find their way home, only offering the light freely, without condition. I have come back to the lighthouse in every chapter of this story, and I come back to it now because I want to give it to you clearly, one more time, as a gift. The lighthouse turns, and the light sweeps across the water, and it asks nothing, and it gives everything it has. That is the image I keep closest. The river, the Nile in late summer, in the late afternoon light, green and slow and enormous, carrying everything, the silt that makes the fields, the trade that makes the economy, the stories that make the civilization, carrying all of it without effort, without complaint, simply moving south to north, the way it has always moved, the way it will always move, the eternal direction of Egypt. I was on the river at 18, and I was on it many times after, and every time I felt the same thing, the scale of it, the patience of it, the way it made my own concerns feel appropriately small, and my love for the land feel appropriately large. The river keeps everything eventually. The library, the rows of scrolls, 500,000 of them at their highest point, the whole accumulated knowledge of the Mediterranean world in papyrus and ink, in Greek and Egyptian and Hebrew and Aramaic and languages I never quite mastered. The smell of old papyrus, which is a dry, slightly sweet smell, a smell like old wood but lighter. The quality of quiet in the reading rooms, a thick and inhabited quiet. The quiet of many minds turned inward. I was in that library as a child with my tutors. I was in it in the evenings of the quiet years. I went to it when I needed to feel that the world was larger than the problem currently in front of me, and it always worked. The 500,000 scrolls always put the problem in its place. I grieve the scrolls that were lost, but what was saved, and what was saved entered the current of time and keeps moving, the way the river keeps moving, the way light keeps moving from the lighthouse across the dark water. My son playing the flute, that thin warm sound in the palace corridor, slightly imperfect, genuinely felt. The same quality as my father's playing, that absorption, that willingness to repeat a phrase until it comes right. I hear it still. The smell of the small white flowers along the garden wall in Alexandria, coming faintly on the morning air, impossible to catch directly, only receivable from a distance, only offered, never seized. Sitting at the high window watching the harbor light change in the evenings, the harbor going from blue to gold, to rose to gray, the lighthouse coming on, the first stars appearing in the east. And, simplest and kept most carefully, the cool of the marble floor under my bare feet. In the early mornings, when the light was just beginning, and the palace was quiet and nothing was yet asked of me, that floor, that quiet, that first moment of the day, before it becomes anything. These are not the things that history keeps about me. History keeps the battles and the alliances, and the deaths and the legend of the woman who was beautiful enough to change the course of empires. History is not wrong to keep those things. They were real, but they are not the things I keep. I tell you this because I think it is the same for everyone. The things we keep are not the significant things exactly. They are the true things. And the true things are often the small ones, the quality of light on a particular afternoon, the sound of something loved, the smell of something that carries a whole world in it. You have your own true things. They are keeping you, even now, even in sleep. They are present in the same way that the lighthouse is present, not demanding your attention, not requiring anything, only there, patient and bright, turning their light across the dark water of your sleeping. Rest in them. Let them keep you. The lamp is very low now. The room is very still. The sea outside is breathing so softly it is barely a sound at all. Only a feeling, a pressure, the knowledge of something vast and patient right outside the walls. The lighthouse turns. Sleep now. Let everything you keep be here with you. Chapter 13. A long Egyptian evening come. There is almost nothing to tell now. The story has almost told itself. What is left is only the evening, a long, warm, golden evening in Alexandria, the kind that lasts past when you expect it to last, the light holding and holding, as though it has agreed with the day to delay the dark just a little longer. Let yourself arrive here gently. Let your weight be entirely given over. The lighthouse is on. It is always on in my memory. The fire at the top of the great tower burning steady in the dusk, the bronze mirrors catching it and sending it out across the water in great arcs, slow and regular, patient and kind. The harbor is quiet at this hour. The big ships have found their moorings. The small boats are hauled up. The merchants have gone home to their suppers. A few fishermen are still out, far from shore, small black shapes on the darkening water, their lamps beginning to glow as the sky deepens. It is warm. The warmth of the late afternoon is still in the stones of the palace, in the walls of the harbor, in the white-painted faces of the buildings along the waterfront. It will stay there for hours, this warmth. Long after the sun has gone, the stones will be giving it back, slowly, freely, until sometime deep in the night, when at last they have given all they have and the air cools. Somewhere in the city, someone is playing music. It is far away, too far to identify the instrument, only to receive the feeling of it, a slow, melodic feeling, something that moves without hurrying, that offers itself to the evening air and lets the evening air do what it likes with it. The music drifts. It finds the window. It passes through. The evening is turning, not quickly. The Mediterranean evenings are not quick. They linger in the way that pleasant things linger, the way warmth lingers in stone, the way the smell of roses lingers in the air after you have walked through them. Long after the direct cause has passed, the effect remains, softened, deepened, more itself. The sky above Alexandria is doing everything it knows how to do. The blue is darkening to a deep, rich, final blue that will last for some time before it becomes the blue-black of proper night. At the horizon, where the sun went down an hour ago, there is still a last wash of gold. Not the bright gold of afternoon, but a softer, more tentative color, the color of something that is not quite over and not quite done. The first stars are appearing. One, then two, then a slow scattering, each one arriving quietly and taking its place in the familiar arrangement that the Egyptian priests have been reading for 4,000 years. The sea below the harbor wall breathes in and breathes out. Breathes in, breathes out. Long, easy, untroubled, the sea does not worry about what comes next. The sea has always been here and will be here long after all the ships that have ever sailed it are dust, and it breathes the same way it has always breathed, in the morning and in the evening and in the deep middle of the night, when there is no one awake to listen but the lighthouse and the stars. Let the sound of it find you. In, out. The lighthouse turns. The light sweeps across the dark water again and again, and each time it passes, the water catches it briefly, a glitter, a shimmer, a moment of reflected brightness, and then releases it, and the dark closes back in, and the light comes again, again, and again, patient, constant, not asking you to follow, only offering the light freely for whoever needs it to find their way. There's no more story now, only this, the evening and the light on the water and the warm stones giving back their warmth, and somewhere in the city a musician playing something slow and melodic into the darkening air, and the sea breathing, and the lighthouse turning, and the stars, one by one, taking their ancient places in the dark above Alexandria, above Egypt, above the long black strip of the Nile, and the desert on both sides, above all of it, the whole enormous quiet of it. You do not need to hold any of this. It is holding itself. It has always held itself. It will keep holding, long after we have each gone down into our rest. Let the evening have you. Let the warmth of the stones be your warmth. Let the breathing of the sea be your breathing. Let the light come and pass and come again. Sleep now. The evening is long and warm and wide. Chapter 14. Sleep now here. Come here. You are very close now. The story is almost over, not because the story has ended, but because the story no longer needs to be told. It is simply here, around you, the way a room is around you, the way a warm night is around you, held and holding. Breathe in, let it out. The lamp is almost done. The flame is very small now, a small bright point in the center of the oil, barely moving, barely a flame at all, only a warmth, only a glow, only enough light to see the room by, and the room needs almost no light now, because the room is known. You know this room. You have been in it many nights. The low ceiling, the smooth walls, the window with the sea outside. You know it the way you know any room you have spent long, quiet hours in, not by remembering its details, only by feeling at home in it, by the absence of any sense that something here is wrong or unfamiliar or requiring attention. Everything here is right. Everything here is easy. My voice is almost done too. I have told you what I wanted to tell you. The lighthouse and the river and the palace gardens and the great library and the barge with the purple sails and the winter evenings in Alexandria and the long autumn light and all the true small things I keep. I have told you everything I know how to tell. What I cannot give you in words, you already have. You have carried it all this time, that quality of resting in a place you love, that quality of being held, that quality of the night being large and safe and full of the sound of the sea. You have always had that. Sleep now. I mean it simply and kindly. Sleep now. Let the story become the dream, or let the story go and let the dark be simply dark, or let there be no distinction at all between the two. Only the warmth, only the breath, only the light from the lighthouse far out on the island, turning and turning and turning without urgency, without end. Egypt is here. The river is here. The library is here. The flute is playing somewhere in the corridor, barely audible, familiar and warm. The flowers along the garden wall are breathing their faint, sweet breath into the night air. The sea is breathing. You are breathing. There is nothing that needs to be decided. There is nothing that needs to be held. There is nothing that needs to be done before morning that cannot wait until morning. And morning will come in its own time, and the lighthouse will still be turning, and the river will still be moving south to north as it has always moved, and the black earth will be there, patient and rich, full of everything it has been given over 4,000 years. It will all be there. It is all already here. I am going to be very quiet now, not because there is nothing more to say. There is always more to say in any life worth living, more and more and more, the layers going down deeper than any one conversation can reach. But because the time for saying is done, and what remains now is only the being, only the resting, only the breath. Let your body be entirely still. Let your mind be wide and empty and dark, the way the sea is wide and empty and dark beyond the harbor, beyond the lighthouse, beyond the last reach of the reflected light. Dark and warm and safe. Good night. The story will keep. I will keep. The lighthouse will keep its light, and you will sleep.